Welcome, Kate. Welcome, Hillary. Glad you're able to join us this afternoon. Let me give it one more minute for folks. Hop on here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Recognizing that we are recording here today, if we have anybody who wasn't able to hop on as we go. All right, well, we're at 3 after, and we've got a fair amount of material to go over here to get you ready to engage with this process. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. These are Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition's educational session preparing for state IRA home rebate hearings. This is the third of these prep sessions that we've done, trying to get folks prepared as different states make their way through this process here this summer and fall. So glad you're able to join us for this one. If this is your first time attending an event put on by Midwest BDC, just at a high level, our mission is to develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve zero emissions from the Midwestern building sector by 2050. We have a pretty wide range of membership, including national and regional groups down to local level community development corporations and church green teams and things like that. So really trying to bring folks together towards this goal of eliminating emissions from our Midwestern buildings on the timeline that we know we need to, and delivering those clean energy and health benefits to folks across the Midwest as well. And you can see there the 8 states that we are primarily focused on as an organization. My name is Jacob Surfling. I'm the Director of Policy and Projects here at Midwest BDC. I'm based out of Des Moines, Iowa. These sessions are the result of a lot of hard work and preparation on behalf of our Federal Policy Working Group and its members. And I want to recognize James Trice from the Minnesota Environmental Justice Coordinating Council and Deirdre Nieves from West Michigan Environmental Action Council for the work that they do with me to facilitate that group and steer its direction. They definitely had a large hand in putting together some of the materials that we're going to go over and the content of these prep session presentations. So thank you so much to them and the work that they do with the coalition. So our agenda here for the next hour or so, we're going to go through some of the basics of this home energy rebates program and the process that state energy offices are working through with that program. So you understand what exactly we're preparing for and why we felt it was important to work with our coalition members and friends to engage with this process. We'll talk a little bit about what you should expect with some of these public stakeholder engagement sessions that states are in the process of holding right now. And then we'll go through some of the talking points, or try to get you thinking about what is it that we actually want to say about these programs. How are we trying to impact how they're going to be implemented on the ground as we go through that session. I should have updated the agenda. We're not going to do the breakout rooms, but we will have plenty of time for questions and discussion as we go through. And hopefully you have something in front of you that you can kind of write and take notes with as we go through. We really want this to be a time to help you get your thoughts together before you go out and participate in these different engagement opportunities. Just a reminder of some of the community norms that we utilize here at Midwest BDC, so that we can make the best use of our time during this. We're going to have plenty of question breaks built into the agenda. So if you have questions, please utilize that Q&A function or put those questions into the chat. We'd be happy to work through that. If there's something where you feel like you would like to come off mute and ask a question or comment on something, please use that raise hand function or type next or stack in the chat, so that we can go through that. Not requiring anybody to be on screen today, so don't worry about that. Just knowing that we maybe have a mix of folks who are familiar with some of these programs or less familiar. I'm going to try to minimize how much jargon and abbreviations I use as I'm going through this material. And likewise, if you have comments or things to make to the group, we ask that you try to do the same so that we can all kind of participate in the discussion on equal footing with each other. Also, trying to make sure that we're including the whole group in any of our discussions and try to minimize any of those side conversations that are maybe outside of today's agenda. If you have interesting things that somebody else says that you'd like to follow up with, we're happy to try to help you connect with those folks outside of the meeting, if that's something that you're interested in. And just a reminder, everyone here is here to help share what they know and be a teacher today as well as a learner. So just be mindful of that as you go through and participate with each other. We're all in this together, working together. Just a reminder, and it probably was part of the registration that you filled out, that part of today's session is going to be talking about this talking points toolkit that we put together. It is available on the Midwest BDC website, and I'll put the link to it here in the chat as well right now. If you have that, that'd be a great thing for you to have open as we're going through this. A lot of this session is built around that toolkit, and there's plenty of space in there for you to add your own notes and thoughts. It's meant to be something that you can kind of get your thoughts together with and have it with you when you have those opportunities to make a comment or participate in discussion around those programs. So want to make sure that people are getting that off of the website and having that with them. All right. With all of that out of the way, I'm going to start getting into the content here today. So what are we actually preparing for? So the background of how we kind of got to this point was the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, almost 2 years ago. I suspect that a lot of folks attending today are at least somewhat familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act already, but at a high level, this was legislation that invested an estimated almost $400 billion into clean energy and climate action. So one of, well, certainly the biggest federal investment in addressing climate change that we've seen. About 2/3 of that money, or that estimated spending around clean energy and climate action, is going to come in the form of tax credits or loans. That's why you see that asterisk there after 391 billion, because that's an estimate on how much uptake of those different tax credits or loans that there might be. But just knowing that the majority of that spending is coming in the form of tax credits and loans. But that remaining third also included some new programs and direct grants to address clean energy and climate change, either through state and local governments, community-based organizations, or is the case with the program that we're talking about today in the form of direct incentives to households to transition to clean and electrified home heating and energy. So part of that third of the overall Inflation Reduction Act in the program that we're specifically talking about today, and that these public engagement sessions that we're preparing for will be talking about, is the Home Energy Rebates Program. You may sometimes hear them referred to as the HER rebates, that acronym of Home Energy Rebates. This is a new $8.8 billion program that was created as part of the Inflation Reduction Act that's going to go through the Department of Energy, and it's going to create new rebates for low to moderate income households to increase the energy efficiency and electrify the appliances in their homes. So within that almost $9 billion, there are actually two separate specific rebate programs, and the money's roughly divided in half between the two. We're going to talk about both today, but one is the home electrification and appliance rebates, or sometimes you'll hear them referred to as the HERE rebates. These are for specific appliances or specific projects that will discount the cost of those items at the point of sale. So for a low-income household, you want to purchase and have a heat pump installed, this would be directly reducing the cost of that work at the time that you're getting it. Or you're upgrading paneling or things like that, this would be directly paid to the contractor that's doing that work, so that it results in a lower upfront cost to the household. The other rebate that is part of this program are the home efficiency rebates, and sometimes you'll hear that referred to as the HOMES program. These are for combinations of work, so it's kind of a more holistic program. So basically, you would have a combination of things done to the home. Maybe you have some insulation upgraded, you replace a couple windows, you replace an appliance, and all of those measures together have to add up to at least 20% energy savings. States will have their own way of figuring out how that goes, whether that's actually measuring the year-to-year energy usage at the meter of that home, or doing some sort of computer modeling to try to project what those savings will add up to. But those rebates would come for those combinations of things that achieve at least 20% savings. So those are the two different programs that are part of home energy rebates. And the important thing that's kind of driving our discussion today is that this is federal money, but those rebates are not going to be administered by the Department of Energy directly. So it's not DOE cutting rebate checks to households or you applying through the DOE website. States, territories, and tribes are going to be responsible for creating and administering their own programs that they'll run at the state level within some guidelines that the Department of Energy gives them. So every state has been allocated a share of that 9.9 billion, and they're going to run their own program for rebates out of that. So who's going to be responsible for that at the state level? And it's going to be that state's state energy office. So this is different in every state, and you can see there listed for the 8 states that we work in what specific department or office in that state is considered their state energy office. But basically, it's just whatever agency or state agency in that state receives funding through the Department of Energy State and Community Energy Program. So they're also going to be the ones receiving these rebates. So again, why is this important? Well, like I said, every state has had funds allocated to them already. You can go on the Department of Energy website and see how much money your state is supposed to be getting to turn into rebates and things like that. But they do still actually have to submit an application to Department of Energy to receive those funds. And part of that application has to be their proposed program design. How are they going to implement this? How are they going to take in applications? How are they going to do outreach to different communities? How are they going to offer some of these different rebates? And as part of putting that application together, one of the requirements that the Department of Energy has is that they have to hold at least one public input session to solicit community input on its proposed deployment plans, and they must describe how this input was used in its program design in their application. So like I said, there are some high-level guidelines that the Department of Energy is giving states on how they're supposed to design and run these programs, but states still have a lot of flexibility in the specifics, in those nitty-gritty details of how they're going to do this, that are going to be really important to make sure that the bulk of the benefits get delivered as much as possible to where they're meant to go, those most underserved, most at-risk communities that can really benefit from these programs. So these required input sessions are a really powerful opportunity for our coalition and our members to have a strong voice in how their states are approaching this program, and really make as strong as push as possible to make sure that this is getting done the right way. So when are these states input sessions happening? And we'll talk a little bit about where the 8 states that we work at are happening, are in their process already. But a few things to keep in mind with that. In many cases, the state energy office is probably hiring third-party contractors to help with help them design the program or implement the program or both. They may be the ones that are actually conducting these input sessions. If you talk to the staff of these state energy offices, a lot of them are very understaffed, especially for launching a brand new program that they've never done before. So in a lot of cases, we are seeing them lean on kind of this outside help from contractors that have some experience managing these types of rebate programs in the past. So you may see states kind of hire these people first and then go about doing some of these input sessions. Another thing to keep in mind, and it applies to one of the states that we're really focused on right now, Minnesota, is that some states may submit part of their application before doing public engagement, that to just access some early administration funding or kind of get the ball rolling with DOE, but submit a more full application later on that has their full implementation plan. So again, we'll talk about a little bit where the 8 Midwest states that we track are at in their process, but I do bring up that bullet point just so if you go on the DOE website and it says, well, it looks like my state already sent in their application, I missed my chance to share my thoughts on this, that may not be entirely true. Sometimes that's a little bit deceptive. So here's an example of what these timelines kind of look like for some different states. This is pulled from the Indiana Office of Energy development, who's going through their public engagement process right now. So you see, they actually applied for some early funding back at the end of 2023, but they're now going back and going through this development process of their implementation blueprint, and that's going to be submitted later on this year, and that's when they'll go through their review at DOE and receive their full funding, and they're hoping to have their program launched then in 2024. And then this is pulled from Michigan earlier this year. So again, they had gotten some early funding to kind of staff up in their office and start doing some of that early administrative work. They were hiring some planning consultants earlier this year, and then they went through their main stakeholder engagement process in March and April. So they're in the process of getting their application in to DOE. I haven't seen an announcement that DOE received that application yet, so they're maybe a little bit behind schedule, but they're still working to, again, try to have their program roll out by the end of the year as well. So that's just a little bit of sort of what we're seeing for timelines from different states across the region. Okay, so getting into where specific states are already happening in terms of that stakeholder engagement process. So if you're joining us from Wisconsin, Michigan, or Missouri, those main public stakeholder meetings that we're talking about today and mostly focusing on have already happened in your state. But again, I would say, just because your state has completed one public engagement process, and the main one that they're required to do for the Department of Energy, doesn't mean that you have missed your window. There's going to be plenty of, I think, other opportunities to continue having that conversation with these state offices. If we go back and look at this timeline for Michigan, for example, yes, they wrapped up their main stakeholder engagement in April, but they're still working through this process of getting their program approved through DOE and putting together requests for proposals for contractors to run that program for them. There's plenty of opportunities to keep having your voice heard through that process. And I will say that we have on our website, midwestdecarb.org/advocacy. We have that page on our website set up right now that we're constantly updating with information on what's happening in different states with this rebate. So when we see new contact opportunities or surveys or announcements or things like that, we do try to make sure that you all are aware of those as much as possible. So don't check out on the process even if you're in one of those 3 states. In terms of states that are actively hot right now for their states input sessions, we have 2. The first is Indiana's that are currently underway. So they had a virtual kickoff meeting in May that was more informational about how the Indiana Office of Energy Development was approaching this program. And they've now transitioned into this phase of having some in-person public input meetings. So those are coming up next week through the end of June in Indianapolis, Evansville, and Fort Wayne. And then at the end of the month, they're going to have one last virtual closing session. So those are the main opportunities to have, verbal interaction with the state energy offices, and in addition to giving them some written thoughts. Those registration details can be found at that indiana.gov webpage. that they specifically have a landing page for the rebates program set up right now. And again, we have all those links consolidated for you at midwestdecarb.org/advocacy to find all the information about registering for those different sessions and participating. In Minnesota, they are just kicking off their main public input sessions next week. So on Wednesday, they're going to have a virtual kickoff meeting. The registration details for that are up right now on the links here below. And again, midwestdecarb.org/advocacy. You can find that. They have also announced that they intend to have 6 in-person forums through June and July. They have not announced the specific locations, dates, or times for those sessions yet, but we will certainly keep you all posted with the information to participate in those. They also have some stakeholder working groups and specific topic focused subcommittees that are going to meet through the summer and fall. You can find information about participating in those at those same links. So if you really want to get deeply involved in that planning process, that's an opportunity that exists as well. So those are the 2 states that are currently going through this process that we've put together this prep session for today. And then the other 3 states that that we focus on still have not announced any specific details yet. So that would be Iowa, Illinois, and Ohio. Ohio has a short survey posted on their website for residents, but that's about it. And they'll still need to do those actual public meetings as well. We're in communication, so as soon as we hear something from those offices to tell you, you'll be the first to know as coalition members as well. I think in a lot of those cases, I suspect that there are background work happening to secure some third-party contractors to do the program that they're not free to speak on just now. And once that gets cleared up, we'll see more details. But unfortunately, while we know they are going to have these sessions at some point this year, we don't have those details yet. All right. So that was a lot of information I just threw at you. I didn't see any questions beyond Illinois status come through the chat or Q&A while I was talking, but I am just going to pause for a second to see if we have any general questions on the home energy rebate program or those timelines that states are working through on their applications before I get into kind of what to expect with these public meetings. So I'll just pause here for a second before we move on. That is a great question, Hillary. I don't believe they are considered taxable income because they're meant to be point of sale, but let me follow up on that. The other thing I'll say is, and I can try to find the link, but if you even just Google Department of Energy Home Energy Rebate Program, they have a great website section on this, and it has a very long, frequently asked questions section on it. So you may find some answers there as well, but I believe the answer to that is that they are not. And I thought I saw a hand go up briefly. Yes, Cheryl, go ahead. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, I wanted to know, do you have any clue of who to who I should contact for Illinois? Because I'm in these SAG meetings with the utilities and all that stuff. That would not be uh the area.
Yep. So Cheryl, Illinois State Energy Office is the Illinois EPA.
Okay.
And they do have, you should be able to find the link to it on that advocacy page on midwestdecarb.org. If you go down to the Illinois section on there, it should have the link to their landing page that they have about these rebate programs. So that would be, I think, the place to go for contact for that. But I'll just say candidly, like they've been a little cagey giving details with that, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And that's where that contact information would be.
Okay, because I'm going through a program with Rewiring America
Mhm.
certification.
Sure.
So I'm trying to line up my own knowledge, so that I can track this better and maybe give some commentary as well. So I'm just trying to get all my resources together so I'll be ready.
No worries. Thank you for doing that. All right, and I see Deirdre found that link to the DOE's FAQ on the program as well. So I'm putting that in the chat if folks had any other questions on that. All right, I'm gonna keep going through so I make sure we get through everything. But again, if you have questions as we're going along, please feel free to throw those in the chat or the Q&A button, and we'll double back and pick those up as we go when we hit these different question breaks. All right, so this is screenshotted during one of Michigan State Energy Office's public input sessions, because I think it's a good example of what, at least for the virtual sessions, is typical. So one, clicking the hand icon to request a comment. 3 minutes max for verbal comments. You can follow up with longer written comments at michigan.gov. And I'm going to go through more specifics of what to expect. But I just throw this up to show like this is, I think, pretty typical of what we're seeing, at least for the virtual listening sessions that we've seen states put on so far. All right. So what should you expect? And like I said, every state's process is going to look a little bit different, but there are a few things that have been reasonably consistent across the board that you all should keep in mind. One, register for these things ahead of time. I think all of the links that we gave have registration links to them, both for the in-person and the virtual. And registering for both of them ahead of time is extremely important. So for in-person, this is how state energy offices are making sure that they're planning for appropriate accommodations ahead of time, that they have enough space and things like that. And beyond just being a courtesy, it is really in your interest to register for these in-person ones ahead of time to show interest, because we've had at least one instance in Michigan where an in-person session that they were offering got canceled because there was low registration for it. So they had more public input sessions on the calendar than what they needed to meet the DOE requirement. The one that got canceled was kind of in a more remote part of the state, just didn't have a lot of people sign up for it, and they canceled it. So if you think there's any chance that you might attend one of these in-person ones, sign up for it ahead of time to make sure it happens. Don't just bank on, oh, I'll register day of if it works out. For the virtual, they're usually not posting the Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever video conference thing they're using. They're usually not posting those links publicly on the website. They're emailing it to the folks that have registered for it ahead of time. And, you know, I think we've all had, or, you know, hopefully not for some of you, had instances of like public virtual meetings getting Zoom bombed and things like that. So it's a little bit of a security reason that they do it that way. But again, make sure that you're registered ahead of time so you actually have the link to get on. Don't bank on, well, I have it on my calendar and I'll find it on the website that day. You probably won't be able to. For the virtual ones, especially, and you just saw it on the slide that we threw up from Michigan, be prepared for there to be a time limit for those verbal comments. Usually it's around 2 or 3 minutes that they ask you to keep it to. So really try to keep it concise as much as you can. Know your key bullet points ahead of time and maybe have like 1 or 2 like key personal things that you attach to it. But don't bank on having, I'm sorry, bank on having a lot of time in that situation to go through a long personal story or anything like that. And they'll pretty much always give, you know, an email contact or something like that if you want to follow up with some longer written notes. So if you want to refer to a certain report or study or something like that, you can email that after the fact, like, hey, this is what I referenced when I had my shorter verbal comments. And again, with that, knowing that it's going to be a short amount of time, it is extremely helpful to script out what you want to say ahead of time and maybe practice reading through it once or twice before hopping on those virtual sessions or attending one of these in-person meetings. And a really helpful tip that James Trice gave us is that 2 minutes in his experience is approximately 300 words. So most, Microsoft Word or those different word processing, they'll have that word count function. Just bank on trying to stay in that like 200 to 400 word range if you want to feel comfortable about getting everything out ahead of time. Typically, especially for the virtual sessions, facilitators will not be answering questions at those sessions. They'll usually be pretty upfront saying, we're here to listen and record comments from the public right now, and will not be answering questions during this session. So just be prepared for that. They're not trying to be rude or shut you down. They're usually very open if you want to contact their offices, you know, over email or something like that outside of these official public hearings, but they'll probably not be answering specific questions at that event. I will say that one thing we've heard from folks that have attended in-person ones is that they're a little bit more flexible with it when it's in person, especially if you can kind of get a side conversation going with somebody at one of those events. So you may have more flexibility with the in-person ones. Again, especially with the virtual ones, they are not checking the registration of who all signed up to be on those hearings and calling on people. They are counting on you being proactive about making your comment. They'll usually tell you like, hey, you need to do your raise hand or indicate in the chat that you're looking to make a comment. And you need to be proactive about that, even if you're registered ahead of time in all of that. So just be aware of that so you don't miss your opportunity to have your comment heard. And then one difference that we have heard in some states with the in-person sessions, and even Missouri a little bit with their virtual one did it this way. Sometimes they have been structured more as like small group discussions, where they've had tables of, 4 or 5 people, and then they have somebody there as a facilitator to kind of go through a list of questions and things with them. So you may end up participating in something that has more of that format with it. So just don't be thrown thinking, well, I wrote down, I scripted out my specific thing, and now they're asking me these questions and things like that. I think it's still extremely useful to have those thoughts written down ahead of time and have, either your own notes or that toolkit on hand with you, so you have something to reference when you're asking those questions. But just be aware that some of the in-person events have been done that way, rather than just having everybody take their turn delivering their comments. And again, just one more time, especially for these virtual ones, where you're going to be under a time limit, write it down and practice it ahead of time. It's the best way to make sure that you're going to get everything across that you want to say. All right. At this time, I just wanted to give some example comments that we have had folks do. And just checking the attendee list to see if we have James on. We don't, so I can read his as an example for folks. And I see we have a hand up from Cheryl. So Cheryl, did you have a question before we get into some examples of what comments might sound like?
No, that's an old hand.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Is it down now?
Yep, it's down now.
Okay.
All right. So these were sent ahead of time by James Trice, who I mentioned helps lead our federal policy working group. He wasn't able to join us this time around, but it's a good example of the types of comments that you might script out ahead of time. So, and his example was 292 words. So if you got a stopwatch in front of you, time and see if that falls into that 2 to 3 minute range. My name is James Trice with the Environmental Justice Coordinating Council, a group of BIPOC community leaders working to understand and address environmental issues in their community. We are members of the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, whose mission is to develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve zero emissions from Midwestern buildings by 2050. BIPOC communities have been disproportionately harmed by deadly carbon emissions from gas burning appliances, heating, and cooling systems. According to the EPA, homes with gas stoves have 50 to 400% higher concentration of NO2, and children are 24 to 42% more likely to develop asthma. The Minnesota Pollution Control Advisory says communities with higher percentage of low-income residents, uninsured residents, and people of color have the highest estimated rates of death and disease related to air pollution. If BIPOC communities don't have equitable access to the environmental adaptation and remediation strategies of the HER program, long-standing disproportionate environmental trauma will continue against BIPOC communities. The Commerce Department should spare no expense to make sure BIPOC communities have access and opportunity to the HER program. The department should flood BIPOC communities with language translated, timely, and easy to understand information about the program through vigorous public service announcements, ads, and cultural ethnic news outlets, radio stations, and with large, colorful billboards. Hire BIPOC staff to specifically engage leaders, groups, agencies, and organizations in their community to provide information about the program and encourage the use of the program. Create a social media office connecting with all social media platforms specifically about the program with dedicated full-time staff to manage it. Make it impossible for landlords who participate in the program to raise rents or evict low-income renters. Thank you for the privilege of your time. And I'm just going to stop sharing my main presentation here and show how James laid his out, because I think it's useful to how you might be thinking about preparing as we go through the rest of today. So you can see he kind of outlined his as a little bit of a introduction to himself, making sure that it wasn't too long or taking up the bulk of his speaking time. He gave a little bit of context for specifically why he wanted the state energy office to focus on the things that he had. And then he had his bullet points ready to go with some specific items that he thought were important for them to include in their implementation plan for the program. So obviously there's large, almost infinite ways that you could choose to structure your comments. And we're going to go through a little bit how you might think about structuring what you want to say about some of these things. But I think it's hopefully useful for you all to have that example of how one person went through putting their comments together. Do you have any other questions before we get into taking a closer look at that talking points toolkit that Midwest BDC has put together, and kind of going through that exercise of getting you thinking about what you might want to say in these public hearings? Okay, not saying anything right now, but we will continue to have time for questions as we go through the rest of the training here today. So again, like I said, hopefully many of you have had a chance to download or print out that talking points toolkit. We're going to talk through what's all in there and how that came together here now as part of this presentation. But like I said, it's meant to be something that you kind of have on hand with you when you are participating in these sections, and hopefully a useful way to help structure your thoughts for that opportunity. So again, yeah, by the end of this part of the presentation, we're hoping you'll have a rough sketch of the comments that you might want to give, even if you're still working on kind of cleaning up some of the exact things. Please take notes as we go through this section. I'm going to talk through the main talking points that our working group developed, but maybe there's one or two of those that you really want to focus on. Maybe as we're talking through some of these concerns that our group had, you have a personal experience that you can connect to your comments that you want to jot down so you don't forget it. Maybe already how you personally would benefit from the rebates, or you've had a bad or maybe really good experience with a similar program that was offered by your state or your utility or your city, that you're hoping some lessons can be drawn from. Specific for those of you who are renters or maybe just work with or care about renters. Part of these rebates are specifically aimed at multifamily housing. Have you had an experience with rent increases or evictions like James touched on after upgrades were made to a building that you lived in? These are all good personal things to tie in with whatever comments or recommendations you might have around the rebate program. So in the talking point toolkit, you'll see they're kind of structured around 4 main themes that the Midwest BDC's federal working group identified. Like I said, the Inflation Reduction Act passed almost 2 years ago, and we've been engaging as a working group with this program for a long time. So Last January, almost a year and a half ago, at the federal level, the Department of Energy issued a list of 59 questions on how they were going to roll out this program that we responded to and gave our thoughts on that spring. We had some preliminary conversations as we've gone with state energy offices that were generous with their time to hear how they were thinking about it, share some of our early concerns. That colored how these talking points came together. And then last summer, the Department of Energy finally released the guidance and application requirements for states. And what we did over the course of last fall was kind of look at what DOE was telling them. Did they address all the concerns that we had? Some of them they did. Some of them they didn't, and they left up to states. And that is a lot of where our talking points came in, of covering those gaps of concerns that we had about making this a tool for equitable decarbonization that we wanted to make sure that states were addressing. So that's kind of the background on where the talking points that we landed on with that toolkit came from. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what they mean and how you might want to incorporate them into any comments that you give on behalf of yourself as an individual or your own organizations. All right. So the first talking point you'll see in that toolkit that we had was states should use rebates to encourage full home decarbonization. And there's a couple different smaller concerns that we had under that main theme. Not small concerns, but like specific concerns under that theme. So one was trying to make sure that these rebates aren't used to subsidize any more fossil fuel equipment in folks' homes. So with the HERE rebates, the home electric appliance rebates, that half of the rebates that are going to specific appliances and measures, there are no gas appliances on that list. So this is really a concern with the homes side of the program, those rebates that can be used for a package of different measures that result in 20% lower energy usage or better for the home. And in that program, there is still some flexibility that if say you were replacing a 20-year-old furnace that was only 80% efficient, and you're putting in a new condensing furnace that's 95% efficient, it could still qualify for rebates. At least federally, they would allow states to do that. Now, states on their own can disqualify certain things from being eligible for the rebates. And that's one of the things that we'd really like to see folks encourage, is just saying like, hey, no gas appliances as part of that program. It should really only either be used to incentivize electric high efficiency appliances or energy neutral measures like insulation. The other concern about this, getting to this goal of fully decarbonizing these households, is seeing this risk that some participants who could most benefit might not even know the full scope of rebates that they qualify for. So for example, in your state, would a household that goes through the weatherization assistance program even be aware that they also qualify for these new rebates that could replace their furnace with a heat pump? Are those two programs talking to each other? That's really critical to getting these households as far down the line of a equitable energy transition as they can get. Or vice versa, somebody who just knows that there's these new federal rebates for a heat pump, are they also going to be made aware of, hey, you could also knock out all of these other upgrades with the other rebates as part of that program that you qualify for? is their education being done to make sure that they know everything that they could potentially benefit from. The second key theme that our working group identified was making sure that states are protecting tenants from in cases where building owners or landlords are using these rebates to make property upgrades. So one aspect of this program that we haven't talked about yet is that the Department of Energy is requiring each state to set aside at least 10% of the rebate dollars to serve low-income multifamily housing. And we have started to see states at least thinking about or including in their applications, making that set aside even higher, which is great because typically renters get left out of these types of rebate programs, but it also comes with risk, right? Because it means that some of these rebates are going to be taken up by landlords, not necessarily the low-income household that owns their own home. So DOE has recognized that to an extent. They are requiring that states enforce 2 years of protections from evictions or rent increases based on those rebated improvements. But you'll see in our talking points that we are telling folks to try to recommend something more like 5 years, and also ask some pointed questions about what enforcement of those restrictions is really going to look like to make sure that that's meaningful, because there are real concerns that have come up very consistently within our coalition and in other places about these rebates, specifically the ones aimed at multifamily, inadvertently leading to green gentrification and displacement and things like that, which are the opposite of what we want to have occur. The third talking point theme that you'll see in that toolkit that we're encouraging folks to think about as they're putting together their own thoughts and comments is that states should place the emphasis of their programs on increasing the affordability of efficiency and electrification upgrades to the most groups possible. So what do we mean when we say that? Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that $9 billion sounds like a lot, but all the projections is that this money will go extremely fast, especially when you think about that 9 billion being divvied up amongst 50 different states and things like that. So knowing that that it'll go extremely fast, states even beyond the requirements that DOE already has should be giving priority to households that just cannot make these projects feasible with other resources such as utility programs or tax credits. So what are we thinking about here that we might want to talk about? So one of the requirements that DOE has is that a minimum 40% of funding of these rebate dollars has to be allocated to what they're calling low-income households. So that's anything below 80% of the area median income. That's the minimum. States can choose to say, maybe 100% of our rebate dollars will only go to those households. Maybe 60%, and still leaving some flexibility for households that are like in that 80 to 100% range, but still realistically might not be able to do all of this with their level of household resources. But regardless, just thinking about how do we make sure that the bulk of this money goes to folks that truly have no other venue or process to go through to make these types of improvements to their home. The other thing that we're watching out for on the home efficiency program. So the homes program is that the Department of Energy opened the door to states giving retroactive rebates for projects that happened after the Inflation Reduction Act has passed, so like 2023 or later, but prior to the state actually having rebates available. So why we have concerns about that is that it's now opened the door for states to say, well, even though you were able to afford the upfront cost of having these efficiency measures installed in your home in 2023 before the rebates were available, we'll still give you the rebate now retroactively. And the concern there is that it's going to eat up that pool of money before some of the folks who just, again, realistically couldn't do any of this without having those rebates available are even aware of the program and able to take advantage of it. And then the last kind of theme that we're talking about in that talking points document has to go around the requirement to have a community benefits plan as part of the application. So again, one of the things that states are going to have to include in their application to get their money from DOE is a community benefits plan that shows how they're going to support 4 key goals that the federal government has for this program. So one is supporting meaningful community and labor engagement. One is engaging and supporting a skilled and qualified workforce. One is advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And then contribute to the Justice 40 initiative, that federal goal that the Biden administration set, that 40% of the overall benefits of federal investments would flow to disadvantaged communities. So those are pretty broad goals that states have to talk about meeting. And there's a lot of different things that they can include within those community benefits plans. But specifically, those of you from a Justice 40 community or working in those communities that are engaging in these public input sessions, I think are going to have really good ideas of things that should be included as part of that community benefits plan. And that was part of what you saw in James's comments with his specific bullet points as well. As a lot of those are things that would fall into that plan of like, how are you making sure this money truly gets where it's meant to go? So we have one state's application, Wisconsin's, that we've been able to see so far in the Midwest, and they had a few good items in theirs that I'll call out as examples of the types of things that we might want to ask for. So they had very specific metrics for having community organizations based in those Justice 40 communities as their partners for doing outreach in implementation of the program. They had an initial cohort of 8 that they identified for the first year, but they also had goals to increase those community partners each year, and specifically have those increases tied to parts of the state where they saw they weren't doing a good job distributing rebates. So, hey, we're specifically seeing like we're not seeing a lot of people in this part of the state being able to take advantage of the rebates. Who's on the ground that we can work with there to make sure that that's actually happening? They had a plan as part of their application for identifying where the issue was that there just weren't contractors that worked in those areas that were capable of doing the type of work that was being rebated, and targeting their workforce development programs and recruitment directly in those areas to help address that. They had part of their community benefits plan was working with some public health partners to target outreach to households with asthma sufferers, which again, I think ties back to some of the comments that James had in his example about those disproportionate impacts of poor air quality. They also had plans to target training for jobs related to the rebates to past participants in the program. So basically, if you lived in a household that had taken advantage of one of these rebates, you would be one of the places that one of the people that they specifically did outreach to try to recruit into these new clean energy jobs that were being generated. So some of those economic benefits stayed in those communities as well. So that's not like an exhaustive list of what would be good for states to have in those community benefits plans, but I think it's a good example of the types of things that might be good to encourage states to do. And then in other things that our members have identified, and you saw reflected in some of the comments that James made, a meaningful plan to partner with culturally appropriate community-based organizations. How are you thinking about translated materials and things like that that are appropriate to these communities where the money should be directed? Training those community partners beyond just here's how they apply for those rebates, but doing that other education of like, and here's the other programs that they could combine it with, or here's how you work with your utility to make sure that you're on the right rate if you're switching from natural gas to electric, or here's what you should be looking for in your home for thinking about which upgrades you should be considering if we're only coming in because, well, my water heater died and I heard that there's rebates. Well, here's some things to look for if there's other things you might want to do right now. Ensuring that communities are invested in by making sure that the data on how these programs is performing is public and accessible. And again, maybe working with partners to analyze the impact of these programs beyond the energy reduction and household income metrics that Department of Energy is requiring them to work with. So again, maybe you partner with the state partners with a university to see if there's actual improvements in air quality in the communities where these rebates are being targeted or things of that nature. All right. So that is all of the information that I had to present out. We still have a fair amount of time left for this webinar. So I appreciate you all sticking around. I'm happy to have some more discussion and questions at this time. I know there's been a couple that have come through the chat as we go. So I'm going to start looking at those. But if you have other questions at this time, please raise your hand or keep adding those to the chat. So Hillary had a question around financial literacy. Are there programs targeted towards the African American community that can help them understand the benefits of those programs? So Hillary, I think that's a great example of something that we should be pushing them to include as part of their community benefits plan. How are you thinking about working with your community partners to have that type of education in place so that they can really understand that outside of just advertising that there's a rebate available? I will say the other thing that's come up recently with that, beyond what the state energy offices can do with these programs, is that there also is other funding streams available to cities or counties that they may be able to do some of that type of programming as well to kind of supplement what the state is doing. So that's another thing to be considering, talking to your state or county about like, hey, are you taking advantage of some of this federal funding to make sure that folks in in this area are taking advantage of these new rebates that the state is going to be rolling out. Cheryl asked, are any requirements for housing stock specific guidelines so people know what type of house, age of home, etc., electrification model is financially feasible for the consumer? Consumers have to have confidence that electrification plan is accurate before they venture into a project. That's a great question. So there's two parts to that answer, Cheryl. One is that at the federal level, the only qualifying requirements that they're looking at are those income eligibility aspects of it. So at the federal level, they have not set any limitations on age of the house or what their current fuel is or anything like that for being eligible for the rebates. It's purely the income eligibility. Now, states have flexibility to limit things more than that if they choose, as long as they're staying within those income eligibility guidelines. So for instance, Wisconsin didn't end up doing it, but something that they talked about quite a bit was if they were going to limit the heat pump rebates to only homes that currently had electric resistance heating or propane or like delivered fuel. And they were going to say that homes that currently had natural gas as their primary fuel weren't going to be eligible. And the reason that they were talking about doing that was kind of the concern that you raised was like, unfortunately, the way that certain utility rates and things are structured and how natural gas gets subsidized. There was concerns in Wisconsin that a household transitioning from natural gas to electric, even if the heat pump was more efficient, might actually still see their bill go up. They decided not to limit the rebates. Those households can still choose to do that if they want, but part of what we talked through with them was like, well, we don't really want you to limit the rebate. We want more households to get off of natural gas, but community outreach plan needs to be that utility education so that those consumers know what they're getting into and they're not surprised by it. And also, hey, you should be working with the utility commission and the electric utilities to say like, hey, what can we do to have appropriate electric heating rates so that folks can make that transition without increasing their energy burden. So again, that is a great line of comments or questions to raise as part of this process. Okay, Rhonda had a piggyback on Hillary's comment. We are noticing that organizations need these funds but do not have the capacity to apply, manage, and seek these funds, or they're not ready to receive them. Okay, yeah, and Rhonda, I think that's a valid thing. I don't know if it's as the rebates themselves are going to go to individual households, and I think states are being very thoughtful about trying to make that application process as easy as possible for the individual households. But I think that's a good point to raise of like, in terms of like, are you making sure, hey, if I already qualify for weatherization or LIHEAP, can I automatically qualify for these rebates? So it's not additional paperwork I have to fill out. That's a great comment to raise. And then on this broader question of like organizations that are trying to access some of these other federal funds, I will say that the EPA has stood up these thriving communities technical assistance centers that are intended to be helping with just that issue. There's 2 in the Region 5, which is most of Midwest BDC's footprint. One's housed at the University of Minnesota. One is housed out of Chicago with Blacks and Green. They are still kind of in early phases of getting stood up, but they are meant to help with exactly that issue that you've raised. And then for Iowa and Missouri folks, there is another one hosted out of Wichita State University that kind of serves that Western Plains part of the Midwest as well, with a similar concept. I see a comment from Philly, just wondering how many people in the Indianapolis area are planning on attending that session. So folks want to respond to her and look for each other at that session, that would be great. And I'll just plug one more time that midwestdcard.org/advocacy. And I'll put the link there in the chat. It's not a link, but you can copy and paste it into your browser. If you go onto that section of our website and scroll down, you'll see a recording of this prep session. You'll see the links to the talking points toolkits, and then you'll see some individual little squares for all 8 of the states that we work in. And that's where you're going to find the most up-to-date information that we have in terms of registering for different prep sessions or other opportunities to engage with this program. So as you're looking for all those links, you can find those there. We're watching those state energy offices websites as best we can to make sure that those are up to date. So that's a great place to look if you're wondering what's happening with your state or can't find the registration link for your state's meetings. And then I see Cheryl and then Deirdre with their hands up. So Cheryl, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I want to give a little more context. Here in Chicago, there was an organization doing like pilots over the past year of doing electrification. And so I had them come to my house. My house is a brick house, 100-year-old house. And they had a process where an assessment, a guy came out to kind of pre-assess. And he's like, yeah, be a candidate. And then when the actual contractor came out, well, they were saying that to do that work would go beyond the $60,000 that they were setting for this pilot. And they didn't give any explanation about where the challenge is, because I'm learning things and I'm looking at, I don't have a lot of free wall space to put, like a heat pump thing in the walls, the heating and cooling. I have a furnace and we have radiators. We don't have vents. And so there's just the way the houses are built. They're close to each other. They're old homes. Flooding is an issue. So if you have that machine on the outside, it could be, you may have an elevation issue. So there's a lot of little things that I just noticed that haven't come up in any meetings. And that makes it hard when you have a whole community that was basically built that way, large swaths of communities, which are also communities of concern. So if they're communities of concern, it almost automatically cuts them out of the Justice 40 initiative.
No, I think that is exactly the type of kind of firsthand experience that these state energy offices or the contractors that they're retaining to implement these programs are looking to hear or should be looking to hear as part of these listening sessions. So that's yeah, that's like a great example of something to bring, you know, when I talked about like, hey, if you participated in something like this in the past and had a good or bad experience. And I think again, that gets back to that talking point that we raised as like the the communities and households that DOE is saying they're intending to serve with this program are, I think, almost universally going to need a lot of help understanding how some of this stuff is going to actually interact with their specific home. And so I think that's a real strong point to kind of keep hammering home every time we have the opportunity, that you just can't roll these rebates out onto the street and, you know, have folks on their own kind of figure out what it is they should be doing with them. They're going to need somebody that can help them understand their home and what's going to be most helpful for them, what type of package of different things can realistically be put together to improve their situation. So thank you so much for sharing that story, Cheryl.
Yeah, that's a big red flag. If you're dealing with older homes, communities with older homes versus some that were built later, it's a big game changer.
Absolutely. Um, Deirdre, I see you had your hand up and had something to share, and then I think we've maybe got time for one more thought or question from folks after that before I shut us down for the day.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that, Jacob, and to everyone, that's a really great point that was just shared by Cheryl, and some of your information there, Jacob, to follow up. It really speaks to the suggestion and point that I was going to make. I'm in Michigan, and I actually attended the Michigan, one of the sessions, in-person sessions in Michigan, and it was modeled based on the earlier approach that you spoke about, Jacob, related to these small group kind of conversations. And I did go prepared with a statement. Just wanted to note that with that statement, they didn't take live statements, but because I had mine sort of typed out, they were able to take my hard copy, but also they directed me to a link that I could share that on their website. And some database that they were collecting messages. But just another point to these sort of older homes and individuals needing to know how to best properly represent themselves. In this Michigan session, we had people coming as far as from Ohio, even as far as California. We had some contractors come out from California, and it's all great that we have individuals that are contractors that know about this work and know what they're doing. But it is an issue as it relates to equity when we talk about having individuals that have an actual footprint in the communities in which we live. And in addition, when we talk about the workforce and who will be doing the work in these homes and coming out and in the communities, and individuals feeling comfortable with those contractors that are coming to their homes and so forth. It really is important that if we're attending these sessions, that's great. A lot of organizations will be present, but it's very important to have individuals from the communities that can come out, whether they're giving comments or whether they're in these smaller sessions, that can express some of these very concerns that Cheryl mentioned. So I just wanted to mention that. We also had a group of sorority sisters come out and bring some individuals with them from the actual community, which I thought was a great idea. So my suggestion is just bring others with you, encourage individual community individuals right from the community to come in and speak and have a say so. And they should know that these sessions are open to them as well as the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Deirdre. I think that's really probably a great way to wrap up. And with that, like I said, just a reminder to folks that all of the material that we went through today, we'll update the recording with this most recent one as soon as possible. The toolkit itself, and then those links to specific information about your states is at that midwestdecarb.org website. And that's a great starting point for, if you're looking to bring in some of those community members like Deirdre was talking, a point to kind of direct them there as a jumping off point if they're trying to learn more about this. All right, well, thank you everybody who stuck with us here to the bitter end. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you around. Thanks everyone.